All these grains are a super easy crop. They're all drought tolerant, and they all require far less babying than broccoli or tomatoes. Very little watering is required, and there's such crops that can really sustain you. Even though we're calling them ancient grains, they haven't really changed in all the 10,000 years we've been growing them. The rye back then is the same as the rye we have now. The wheats are not quite the same because in Canada we focus so much on getting bred wheats to mature a little bit earlier, so we've gone down a very narrow lane, but most other countries have many, like thousands of different varieties of wheat or barley. Basically, as you know, our model for agriculture for a long time has been this large-scale monoculture agriculture. The varieties that I grow are probably none of them like what they grow on the prairies, just because I've got them from around the world, and the flavor is so obviously just superior. This is an emmer wheat, also a very old wheat, different than our modern bred wheats. In breeding for high gluten, making it better for breads, we lost a lot of the flavor. The other wheats still exist. They're threatened, but we could go back to them. And when I was in Ethiopia, a farmer in the field just handed me a couple of heads of wheat, and I brought it back and I grew it out, and it matured about 2 weeks ahead of any Canadian wheats, which is astounding because that's the sole focus of breeding in Canada has been to get grains to mature a lot earlier. You know, so how many other wheats are also way earlier to mature that we don't even know about? And that ended up being a commercial crop in California on thousands of acres now. People don't realize that the reason they're allergic to wheat and bread is residues of Roundup. Gluten intolerance is one thing, and some people have it, but I would bet that 90% of the people who think they're allergic to wheat are not. They're allergic to Roundup. It's heavy-duty stuff, and there's been thousands of tests proving that it's really bad news, you know, and yet nothing ever happens. Well, it's standard practice now to aerial spray with Roundup, and that makes it easier for the combines because it kills all the weeds, all the stuff that's in with the wheat or the barley or whatever, but it's also a desiccant, and it dries them and makes it easier to cut. You know, amaranth, there's stories about amaranth and quinoa, you know, sacred grains of the Aztecs and the Incas. Not true grains, but seeds. Both amaranth and quinoa are tremendously drought tolerant. One amazing thing about amaranth, you can get a pound of seed for it from one plant. The potential is phenomenal. It's about 17% protein if you're looking at the seeds. In some countries, people focus on the leaves of amaranth. They're very high in calcium and iron, and they're just a standard food in the Caribbean and Southeast Asia. I always thought that quinoa was less likely to catch on than amaranth, but quinoa became a super big hit. It has just a little bit more flavor than amaranth, but it's very similar. But it's a cooler weather crop than amaranth. The leaves of quinoa too are edible and pretty good. And quinoa is very high yielding too. Flax is fun. In terms of nutrition, there's not many plants that a home gardener can grow to get good oil, and flax is one. There's many different kinds of flax, and the one I grow, I call golden flax, is the one that you can eat just out of your hand as you're harvesting it. Well, barley, one interesting that I have are what are called hulless barleys. They actually have a hull, but gotten the name hulless because the hulls come off really, really easily. They're interesting for really small scale farmers because you can harvest your own barley and thresh it easily. I've developed a simple system of just walking on it in my threshing box, and I just push my feet back and forth, and it comes right off the hulls, and then I just blow the chaff away, and it's really fast.